What would you do if you were holding a bleeding child in a hospital parking garage at midnight, and the only number in her coat pocket connected you to the most dangerous man in Las Vegas? Vera Callum didn't have time to answer that question. She just dialed. She had been pulling a double at St. Mercy's that night. 14 hours in scrubs that smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. Her feet aching from the worn-out soles of sneakers she kept meaning to replace. The garage was mostly empty when she cut through it after her shift. She always parked on the third level, because it was cheaper than the covered lot closer to the ER entrance, and every dollar counted when you were 3 months behind on student loans, and your landlord had started sliding passive-aggressive notes under your door. She almost didn't see the girl. She was tucked between two SUVs half hidden by the shadow of a concrete pillar. 7, maybe 8 years old. Dark curly hair plastered to her forehead. She was wearing a pink puffer coat, the kind with little silver stars on the sleeves, and she had one arm wrapped around her middle like she was trying to hold herself together. Vera crouched down before she even made a conscious decision to stop. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey, I see you. I'm right here." The girl's eyes opened. Brown, glassy, too. Still for a child that age. "Does it hurt somewhere?" A small knot. Then her free hand moved toward her side. Vera had 8 years of nursing instinct, and she used all of it in the next 30 seconds. She got the coat open carefully, keeping her voice low and steady the whole time, the way she talked to patients who were scared. There was a gash along the girl's left side, not deep enough to be immediately life-threatening but bleeding steadily through a makeshift wrap made from what looked like a torn piece of shirt sleeve. Someone had already tried to patch her up, someone who knew what they were doing. "Who did this for you, sweetheart papa?" the girl whispered. "Where's your papa now?" The girl didn't answer. She reached into her own coat pocket instead, with the careful, deliberate movement of someone who had been told exactly what to do, and held out a folded piece of paper. One phone number, no name. Vera looked at it for a moment, then she looked at the child. Then she called 911 first, gave the location, and kept the girl talking while she waited. "What's your name? What's your favorite color? Do you like dogs or cats?" Very important question. And the girl said her name was Rosalie, and she liked dogs better but only medium-sized ones because big ones scared her a little. "That's a very reasonable position," Vera said. "I respect that." Rosalie almost smiled. The ambulance would be 4 minutes. Vera had already decided she was riding with the child because there was no way she was leaving a bleeding 8-year-old alone in a parking garage. Professional boundaries be damned. But she looked at that phone number again, and something in her said, "Call it now, before the sirens get here, before whatever situation this girl came out of gets more complicated." She called. It rang twice. "Who is this?" Not a question, a demand. The voice was low and controlled and extremely precise, the voice of someone who had not been caught off guard but was determining very quickly how off guard they needed to pretend to be. "My name is Vera. I'm a nurse at St. Mercy's Medical Center in Las Vegas. I found a little girl in the parking garage here. She says her name is Rosalie. She's been injured. A laceration to the left side, someone already dressed it. She's stable but she needs imaging. I'm waiting on an ambulance right now." 4 seconds of silence. Pink, puffer, silver stars on the sleeves. She heard something on the other end she couldn't quite name, not a sharp sound. More like the very controlled exhale of someone choosing very carefully not to make a sharp sound. "Do not leave her," the man said. "I wasn't planning to. I'll be there in 11 minutes. The ear, I know where it is." He hung up. The ambulance arrived in 3. Vera rode with Rosalie, held her hand through triage, told the attending everything she knew about the wound and its dressing. She was technically off the clock, but nobody questioned her presence because she was in scrubs, and she knew exactly what she was doing, and sometimes that was enough. Rosalie's vitals were stable. The laceration needed 6 stitches. She had bruising along her ribs that was older than tonight's injury, the kind that made the attending shoot Vera a look across the bed, and Vera gave a small nod back. "I know, I see it too." He arrived at 11 minutes exactly. Vera knew it was him before he said anything because the whole hallway shifted when he walked in. Not dramatically, not the way it happened in movies. It was subtler than that. The way people unconsciously moved to the side. The way the charge nurse at the station sat up slightly straighter. The way 2 men who had been sitting in the waiting room for the past 20 minutes stood up. The moment he came through the glass doors, he was tall, dark coat, no tie. Dark hair going silver at the temples. He looked like he was in his early 40s but carried it the way some men did, like the years had made him more solid rather than less vain. He had the kind of face that was handsome in a way that made you slightly nervous about it. He stopped at the doorway of Rosalie's curtained bay and looked at his daughter, and for just a moment every controlled, careful thing about him came completely apart. He crossed the room in 3 steps and knelt beside the bed and said her name very quietly. Rosalie, and she said Papa and wrapped her good arm around his neck, and Vera suddenly found the wall across the room extremely interesting. She gave them a minute. Then she started to move toward the exit because her job here was done and she had a bus to catch and her feet still hurt and she was running on fumes. Vera, she turned. He was standing now, Rosalie's hand still in his. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully read, measuring and direct and something else she didn't have a name for. Thank you, he said, and then, I'm Dorian Voss. She had heard that name. Everyone in Las Vegas had heard that name. You didn't necessarily know the details. Most people were smart enough not to learn the details, but you knew the name the way you knew the names of certain weather events, something large and significant and best respected from a distance. Vera Callum, she said. I know. He said it without explanation. She let that sit. She needs to stay overnight for monitoring. The attending will want to talk to you about the bruising on her ribs. It's older, not from tonight. They have to ask certain questions. I want you to be prepared for that. He didn't flinch. I'm aware. It happened 10 days ago. She fell from a horse at the property. I have documentation. Vera looked at him steadily. In 8 years of nursing, she had developed an extremely well-calibrated internal alarm system for when adults were lying about how children got hurt. That alarm was not going off. What she saw instead was a man who was exhausted in a bone-deep way and furious at himself about something he was not going to discuss in a hospital hallway. Okay, she said. You should go home, he said. You've been on shift since 6 this morning. She stared at him. How do you know that? He looked at her for a moment. You have a 14-hour badge timestamp on your ID lanyard and there are 2 empty coffee cups in your jacket pocket. She looked down. There were, in fact, 2 empty cups she had forgotten to throw away. Okay, she said again, somewhat differently. She went home. She thought she was done with it. She was not done with it. Her supervisor called her into the office 2 days later. Not about Rosalie, about her hours. St. Mercy's had been cycling through a quiet restructuring for the past few months, which was administrator speak for cutting staff costs without technically laying anyone off. Vera's hours had been moved from full-time to 32 per week. The reason given was low census numbers on her floor. She knew it wasn't census numbers. She had clocked more floor hours than anyone on her unit for the last 6 months. She also knew that 3 weeks ago she had submitted a formal complaint against Dr. Harlan Reed, the unit's medical director, who had suggested in the break room, in front of 2 other nurses, who suddenly became very busy checking their phones, that Vera would find things much smoother for herself if she was friendlier with the right people. She had written it down verbatim the moment she got home. She had filed the complaint through the correct channels. She had been polite, professional, and thorough. 2 weeks later, her hours were cut. She sat across from her supervisor and listened to the official explanation, and kept her face very carefully neutral, because she had learned by now that getting angry in these conversations only gave people a reason to dismiss you. When it was over, she walked to the break room, poured herself coffee she didn't want, and stood at the window looking out at the parking structure where she had found Rosalie 6 days ago. She had bills due at the end of the month that assumed full-time pay. She had a security deposit due on a new apartment because her landlord had raised her rent again. She had a cousin in Phoenix she could probably stay with, but the thought of it, the retreat, the admission that she couldn't make it work, sat in her chest like things swallowed wrong. She called in a shift at the urgent care clinic across town instead, $14 less an hour and no benefits, but it was hours. She was walking to her car after her first clinic shift when the black car pulled up alongside her. The window went down. Dorian Voss looked at her from the back seat. Get in, he said. I don't get into cars with men I don't know, she said. You know my name. You've known it for 6 days. Knowing your name is not the same as knowing you. A pause. That's fair. He looked at her steadily. I'd like to talk to you about Rosalie. There's a coffee shop on 5th. I'll drive separately. You can drive yourself. Vera thought about this for a moment. She thought about Rosalie's hand in hers in the ambulance, the careful way the girl had held the piece of paper with the phone number. "Fine," she said. He was already at a corner table when she got there. He had ordered her a coffee, black, no sugar, which was exactly how she drank it and which she decided not to comment on. He stood briefly when she sat down, which was a small thing and also slightly disarming. Rosalie had been discharged the previous morning. She was home recovering. He said this first, before anything else, and Vera appreciated it. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Rosalie has spoken about you every day since she left the hospital. Not just about the garage, about the ambulance ride. She said you made her laugh. She had very strong opinions about medium-sized dogs." For the first time something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. "She does. We have two, both medium-sized." He paused. "She has a nanny. The woman has been with us for 3 years and she's very capable. But Rosalie has been, since her mother passed, difficult to reach sometimes. She keeps people at a comfortable distance." Vera was quiet. "She asked me this morning if you would come to dinner," he said. "I told her I'd ask Mr. Voss." "Dorian, I'm not sure that's appropriate. You're a nurse. She's formed an attachment to following a traumatic event. That's not unusual. I'm also a stranger." "You're the stranger who held her hand in an ambulance at midnight and asked her about dogs." He looked at her levelly. "To Rosalie, that makes you the opposite of a stranger." Vera turned her coffee cup in her hands. She thought about appropriate professional distance and the reasons it existed. She also thought about a small girl in a pink coat with silver stars, tucked between 2 SUVs, waiting very patiently for someone to notice her. "One dinner," she said, "as a kindness to your daughter, Muxust." Understood. It was not, in the end, one dinner. It was one dinner, and then Rosalie wanted to show Vera the dogs, so there was a walk in the garden. Then, a week later, Rosalie asked through Dorian whether Vera could come to her school's autumn performance because she was playing a tree and she wanted someone to take pictures. And Dorian said this without expression, and Vera said yes because she was constitutionally incapable of saying no to that sentence. She learned things in small pieces. Rosalie's mother, Helena, had died 2 years ago. An aneurysm, sudden and absolute, no warning. She had been 34 years old. Rosalie had been 5. She had apparently been extraordinary, and Dorian spoke of her with the precise, careful love of someone who had made peace with grief but had not made peace with the specific unfairness of it. She learned that Rosalie's injury on the night of the garage had happened because of a situation Dorian described only as a business disagreement that was resolved, and that the men who had thought they could get to Dorian through his daughter had been comprehensively mistaken in that assumption. He said this quietly and without elaboration, and Vera did not ask for elaboration because she was a person who understood which questions had useful answers. She learned that Dorian Voss had, without mentioning it, had a conversation with the hospital's parent company's board of ethics regarding the treatment of nursing staff at St. Mercy's. She found this out not from him but from a colleague who called her in disbelief to say that Harlan Reed was on administrative leave, and that the hours of 3 nurses, including Vera, had been quietly restored to full time. She confronted him about it over coffee in his kitchen while Rosalie was at school. "You had no right to do that without telling me," she said. "You're correct," he said. "I should have asked first." She had prepared for deflection and got agreement, which was annoying in its own way. "I filed that complaint through proper channels. I was handling it. You were handling it. Correctly and slowly. And in the meantime you were working $14 clinic shifts and calculating whether you could afford your security deposit." He looked at her steadily. "I have certain resources. I used them in a way that didn't require you to do anything, except accept an outcome you had already earned. That's not the point." "What is the point?" She held his gaze. "The point is that I'm not something that needs managing." Something changed in his expression. Slowly. "No," he said, "you are not." Silence stretched between them. Outside, one of the dogs, the larger of the 2 medium ones, was attempting to excavate something from the garden. "Don't do it again without asking," she said. "I won't." She believed him. The night everything shifted was a Tuesday in November, which was an extremely undramatic night for something important to happen, but that had been her experience. The significant moments rarely announced themselves correctly. Rosalie had had a bad dream and came down the stairs at 11 p.m. while Vera was still there because they had been watching a movie and she had fallen asleep on the couch, and neither Dorian, nor apparently anyone else had wanted to wake her. She heard Rosalie's footsteps and was already awake when the girl appeared in the doorway, hair messed up, holding a stuffed dog. "I dreamed about Mama," Rosalie said. Vera opened her arm and Rosalie came and sat beside her, and she asked what the dream was about, and Rosalie said Mama was teaching her to braid and she kept getting it wrong. But Mama had said that was fine, they had time, they'd try again tomorrow. And then Vera asked what Helena's hands had smelled like, and Rosalie said roses and something else, sweet, maybe vanilla, and they sat with that for a while. Dorian appeared in the doorway and saw them there and stopped. He looked at his daughter asleep against Vera's shoulder 10 minutes later, and then he looked at Vera, and she looked back at him, and neither of them said anything about it, but something true happened in that room that no careful distance could undo. "She's going to be okay," Vera said quietly. "I mean that medically and the other way too." He sat on the chair across from them. He didn't say anything for a moment. "I know," he said. "I've been less sure about myself." Vera looked at him. He looked back. "That's the first honest thing you've said about yourself," she said. "I practice restraint. I've noticed." She paused. "For what it's worth, and I say this as a medical professional, you're going to be okay too. Probably." The corner of his mouth moved. "Probably. I'm not making promises outside my expertise." "Your expertise," he said, "seems to extend quite far." The lawsuit against Harlan Reed was filed in December by 2 other nurses. Vera had not known were building cases of their own. She was asked to contribute her documentation and did. The hospital settled in February. It was not a large amount, but it was a public acknowledgement, and it mattered. Vera got a card from one of the other nurses afterward. It said simply, "Thank you for going first." She put it on her refrigerator. She and Dorian had exactly one direct conversation about what he did and who he was. And they had it at a restaurant in late January, and it went like this. "I'm not a good man in the way most people mean it," he said. "I know. I've done things I can't explain and wouldn't try to. I know that too." He looked at her across the table. "Does that change things?" Again, not a question. She had learned he spoke that way sometimes. Statements wearing the clothes of questions, waiting to see if you'd answer them anyway. "It changes things in the sense that I have to know what I'm choosing," she said. "But it doesn't change what I've seen in the last 4 months. Which is someone who grieved well and raised someone extraordinary and drives 11 minutes to a hospital garage at midnight because his daughter is scared." He was quiet for a moment. "She's not scared of much. She was that night. She just held very still about it, which she learned from somewhere." He looked away briefly. "I'm not asking you to be different than you are," Vera said. "I'm saying that who you are is enough for what I'm deciding." In the spring, Rosalie learned to braid. She practiced on Vera first, badly, enthusiastically, without apology, and then on Dorian, who sat on a kitchen stool with immense patience and allowed his daughter to make something chaotic of his hair, while Vera documented it on her phone. He caught her eye in the kitchen window reflection and shook his head slowly, in the way of a man who had made peace with his circumstances. She was still laughing when Rosalie declared the braid finished and climbed down from her step stool and made them both look. It was uneven. It was imprecise. The rubber band was already threatening to slip. "It's perfect," Vera said honestly. Rosalie turned to her father. He examined the result in the window glass with great seriousness. "Magnificent," he said. "Papa," Rosalie said with the particular exasperation of a child who cannot tell if she is being mocked. "Is it actually good?" Dorian reached over and put his hand over Vera's where it rested on the counter. He didn't look at her when he did it, just kept looking at Rosalie with that expression that belonged only to his daughter. "It's the best thing I've seen in years," he said, and he meant both answers at once. Rosalie beamed. Outside the kitchen window, Las Vegas went about its loud and golden business, indifferent to the quiet that had settled in that house. The specific, hard-won quiet of people who had learned to trust slowly and had not regretted it.